Triglycerides in a low carbohydrate state are not very high.
Yep.
Yes,
Not very
transit time is very low.
Exactly.
Uptake is very fast.
Yep. So yeah, you get high triglycerides from carbohydrates. Whatever you're not using at the moment goes to the de
You'll
novo
still
lipogenesis.
get
Yeah, I mean, if you
you're still
have a
getting,
little bit of mixing, because if
yeah,
you do like
yeah,
extremely
yeah,
high carb,
yeah. We're still going to be exporting triglycerides. It's basically because with excess glucose, what happens is the body, once it takes in, let's say, even fructose, like I'll give you an example. Fructose comes in, part of it will circulate around, and obviously has some glycating effect and all that. Once it gets to the liver, about half of it will be turned to glucose. In the low fat argument, oh, it all turns into fat. Bullshit. Which bloody physiology book did you read? This is why when we say that it all is sugar, Bart says it all is sugar and it's going to spike you, and it's going to have an effect on your insulin. He's right. Paul Saladino has no friggin' idea. He should stick to psychology. He doesn't understand physiology and biochemistry. Should stick to psychology. That's his place. His lane, because he's completely ignorant about the other stuff and he just looks at studies and doesn't even understand them. But getting back to the point, when fructose goes in, that amount is about 17%, I think it is, roughly, will get converted to lactate. Is about, I think it's 25%, which turns into glycogen, because it's more of an expensive process. It'll actually push out the sugar, and if it comes back, then it will repurpose it, because it's a dynamic system. It's always moving things around. We're just talking, if you were just putting a certain amount, nothing else, what would it do to it? Like a closed system, nearly. But things will flow out into the bloodstream. They'll come back, and things go around the place. It's a dynamic system. You have to sort of, and it's hard for many people who think in reductionist terms. But now I'm just giving you a very reductionist of small amount, what it happens in the liver, just to basically explain what is happening to it. 25% into, and the rest, which isn't exactly like 7-8% or whatever, isn't exactly, part of that's going to be turned into fat, free fatty acid, but not all of it. Not all of it will. And then that will be, you'll have a glycerol backbone attached to it, become a triglyceride, next be exported then out as a VLDL. So this is what happens to all these components. Alcohol, on the other hand, actually more alcohol. Yes, it does use similar pathways as Lustig says, but alcohol, more of it will actually turn into fat than fructose. It's only excess fructose, not a certain amount that the body can actually, when it gets, or excess glucose, when it gets really, really high, and the body just goes, there's just too much. I've only got so many enzymatic steps. I can only do so much to it. I can't deal with the rest of it. I'm going to just turn the rest of it to fat. My glycogen stores are full. The amount of glucose out there required for the brain for all these, is, it's coming back and it's coming back into the liver, and the liver's going, oh, it's just too much in the system. I need to repackage this. That's when it starts producing it ramps up then triglycerides. And that's pretty much then, under those sort of circumstances, when you get beyond the excess, what we would call Randall cycle activating, where you would get more of that converted into fat to be stored away safely as triglycerides. And that's why diabetics have higher levels of triglycerides where a vegan doesn't. because they are oxidizing primarily sugar. There's very little fat to engage the Randall cycle. So those substrates don't stay in the liver or in the bloodstream, as have a lot shorter duration because there is no engagement of the Randall cycle, as we would say, unless they go crazy and they go into excessive levels. Then some of that could be converted, So that's sort of the mechanisms of how things work. It's a dynamic system. You have to think of it in a dynamic thing. Most people get fixated on this pathway doing that, on this doing that. No, it depends on the gradient of the Randall cycle, what will happen inside the liver in terms of the same substrates. So glucose, fats, whatever is in the liver, how that gets repackaged will depend on what's happening elsewhere in the system. It's a complete system interacting and signaling and saying there's too much of this or not enough of this or whatever. And it will repackage and redo things because the body is a very intelligent thing. It's been doing it for millions and millions of years. It knows how to repackage things and readjust and all that to basically repackage and put things out as required. And so even at excessive amounts, you will still end up just putting more into the adipose tissue and clearing it out because you can't take it up. There's just too much. So the body knows how to sort of do the triage of moving things around, and all the signaling pathways that are actually happening, the signaling molecules are saying, and all these hormones that are signaling going, too much of this or that, we need to do this or move that around or send that here. And so that's why I can actually go and actually show you one pathway of a diabetic and show you what happens with his carbs in his system, and then a vegan or an athlete. It's going to be slightly different, what's happening in the liver. And so that's the relationship of the Randall cycle with the way things get processed and all these things. It's an interplay. It's a complex interplay. And so it's not in the simplistic way that you'll find in the vagunarized community, in the repeat community, because their minds cannot think in terms of systems, dynamic systems. They're fixated in narrow, reductionist sort of processes within the body, and from that extrapolate a whole lot of nonsense. That's why they extrapolate so much nonsense, for that reason, because they can't get their head around it. Possibly, the carbs are dumbing them down, I would say. Wouldn't you agree, Lukey?
Yes.
Careful how you answer this question. I will send Ted around.
No, I'd agree quite a bit, Harry, from personal experience.
He's okay, Ted. Don't worry. You don't have to deal with him.